The story of World War II is filled with legendary weapons that defined the outcome of battles and shaped the course of history. But among all these weapons, there was one that struck fear into the hearts of Allied soldiers, unlike anything else. The MG42, the German machine gun nicknamed Hitler's Buzzsaw. This was not just a weapon of war, it was a psychological weapon, designed to terrify, to break morale, and to make soldiers feel helpless under a storm of fire. In this video, we are going to uncover the untold story of the MG42, how it was created, why it was so devastating, and why its terrifying sound became one of the most feared noises of the entire war. To understand the MG42, we need to go back to the early 1930s. Germany, under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, was secretly rebuilding its military power despite the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The German High Command knew that in order to dominate future battlefields, they needed a weapon that could provide overwhelming suppressive fire. Machine guns were not new. The First World War had already shown their destructive potential, but most of the designs used in the 1920s and 1930s were heavy, prone to jamming and difficult to move. The Germans wanted something different, a weapon that was reliable, portable, and capable of firing at a rate so fast that enemies would be pinned down with no chance to fight back. The result was the MG34, the first general-purpose machine gun introduced in 1934. It was advanced for its time, highly accurate, and versatile, able to be used on bipods, tripods, and even mounted on vehicles. But the MG34 had one major flaw. It was expensive and time-consuming to manufacture. In a total war, when weapons needed to be produced by the millions, this was a serious problem. The Nazis needed something faster, cheaper, and even more deadly. Out of this need, the MG42 was born. Designed by Heinrich Vollmer and developed by the company Mauser, the MG42 entered service in 1942, right in the middle of the war. From the first time it was used in combat, Allied soldiers immediately recognized that this was not an ordinary weapon. The MG42 could fire up to 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, more than double the rate of most Allied machine guns. To put that into perspective, that means 20 to 25 bullets were fired every single second. The sound of the weapon was so unique and so rapid that it didn't sound like individual shots. It sounded like the tearing of cloth or the buzzing of a giant saw. That is how it earned its terrifying nickname, Hitler's Buzzsaw. For soldiers on the battlefield, hearing that sound meant instant panic. The Allies described it as a noise that seemed to come from everywhere, a wall of sound that crushed morale before the bullets even landed. Veterans recalled that the psychological effect of the MG42 was sometimes even greater than its physical destruction. Soldiers would freeze, dive for cover, or hesitate to advance because they knew that in just 1 second, a burst from the MG42 could cut down an entire squad. It was not just a machine gun, it was psychological warfare. But the MG42 was not just about fear, it was also an engineering masterpiece. It had a quick-change barrel system, which allowed gunners to swap barrels in seconds when they overheated, something that plagued most machine guns of the era. Its stamped steel construction made it faster and cheaper to produce than the MG34. It was reliable in mud, sand, and snow, conditions that destroyed many other weapons. German tactics revolved around it. In fact, the German infantry squad was built around the MG42. The machine gunner was the centerpiece, and all other soldiers were there to support him, carry ammunition, and protect the gun. Unlike the Allies, where the rifleman was the core of the unit, for the Germans the machine gun was king. That is how powerful the MG42 was. The Allies quickly realized that they were at a disadvantage. Their standard weapons, like the American Browning M1919 or the British Bren gun, had lower rates of fire and were less intimidating. Some Allied soldiers even joked grimly that they wished they could steal MG42s from the Germans. Captured weapons were indeed used, and the Allies studied the design with great interest. They recognized that the MG42 was not just a weapon for Germany's war, it was the future of automatic weapons. The legacy of the MG42 did not end with World War II. In fact, its influence is still seen today. After the war, Germany's new Bundeswehr adopted a slightly modified version called the MG3, which is still in service to this day. NATO machine guns, including the American M60, were directly inspired by its design. Even the modern M240 and other general-purpose machine guns trace their roots back to the MG42. In a way, every time modern soldiers fire a machine gun, they are hearing echoes of the weapon that terrified their grandfathers. But the MG42 also symbolizes something darker about war. It shows how technology can be used not only to kill, but to terrify. Its speed, its sound, its presence on the battlefield, all of these were calculated to make human beings feel powerless. Soldiers who fought against it never forgot it. Decades after the war, veterans could still recall the sound of Hitler's Buzzsaw with a shiver in their voice. It was the sound of death itself. The MG42 remains one of the most infamous weapons ever created. It was efficient, terrifying, and brutally effective. It embodied the ruthless efficiency of the Nazi war machine, but it also left a permanent mark on the history of warfare. Its sound will forever be remembered as the soundtrack of fear in World War II. And while the war is long over, the legacy of Hitler's Buzzsaw still echoes through history, reminding us that sometimes the most terrifying weapon is not just the one that kills the most. It is the one that makes men lose their courage before the first shot even lands.